Trigger warning. Hey, friends, before we begin, I want to give you a heads up. Today's episode includes some graphic and disturbing details surrounding a heinous crime. It may be difficult to listen to, so please take care of yourself as you go through this episode. If at any point it feels like too much, it's okay to pause or step away. Your peace of mind always comes first. Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. As always, I'm happy to be back with you guys this week. Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today. Grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, but most certainly grab your wine if it's the evening. Either way, let's get into it. It was a quiet Sunday night in Springfield, Massachusetts. The kind of night where the city feels still, but something sinister lingers beneath the surface. Two detectives were working overtime, noticed a dark Nissan Altima up ahead. Now, nothing unusual except for one small thing: a burnt out taillight was on the vehicle. So the detectives got behind the car and signaled for it to pull over. But as the Altima rolled to the right, the detective noticed something strange. As they got all their information together to run the traffic stop, they noticed that the brake light stayed on. This is an indication to detectives that if they get out the car, more than likely the car might pull off. And they noticed that the driver was looking around, like his head was scanning back and forth the situation. He was a black, middle aged man with short hair and a white shirt. And accompanied with that brake light that stayed on and his suspicious behavior, they didn't know exactly how this traffic stop would go. It was instinct, though. The detective knew that this wouldn't be a simple stop. Using a police tactic that I'm glad to reveal to you guys, they both opened their car doors, and because it's dark, you don't really know what's going on, and they quickly closed it back, pretending to exit their car. And immediately when they closed their door, the Altima took off. The tires screeched, sirens wailed, and the chase was on. They radioed dispatch. Suspect fleeing recklessly through a residential area. It was late. The streets were quiet. Another cruiser blocked the path from the front, forcing the car to stop. And when officers approached, they saw a woman in the passenger seat, somebody they didn't see before. She seemed terrified, but they couldn't look at her because they needed to focus on their suspect in the driver's seat. The driver stuck both of his hands out the window as if to surrender, but the moment that they pulled him out of the car, he began to resist. And it was a fight to get him restrained after an initial struggle. In his pockets, they discovered two knives. Then, as they placed him in the police cruiser, the man shouted that there was a body in the trunk. Detectives didn't know what to think because now that he was secured, they needed to check on the woman who was in the passenger seat and appeared to be scared. And they didn't know if he was trying to deter their attention or if there really was a body in the trunk, but they nevertheless knew they needed to see. They opened the trunk. Upon opening it, it revealed that it was empty. This guy clearly was lying. They asked for his name before they speak to the passenger. He refused to give them their name and say, look, you might as well tell us who you are so that we can identify you. Either way, we will end up finding out who you are. Finally, after not speaking for a time, he identifies himself. It's Stewart Weldon. They go over to the other side and they speak with the woman who, at this point, is screaming at the top of her lungs. She's beyond terrified. She tells police that Weldon has held her captive for months, beating, raping, and torturing her. She even pointed to an injury. She claimed that her jaw was broken, and as the police flashed the light towards her jaw, they could see that her jaw was shifted in an unusual way. It wasn't normal. Clearly had been broken. She lifted up her shirt to expose her stomach, which bore dozens of stab wounds, and she showed her thigh, which had a wound in the shape of a hammer. Dozens of stab wounds found on her stomach all had differing levels of wound care. which indicated that when she received one stab, she received another, and this happened over time. She was rushed to the hospitals, and her injuries were documented in full detail. Weldon was arrested on multiple charges, including kidnapping, failure to stop from police, amongst many other charges. His bail was set to $1 million. But detectives couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an arrest. Something about Weldon had terrified that woman, and it was more that they would have to uncover, but they didn't know quite where to start yet. Days later, the Springfield Police Department received a very strange phone call. A woman named Constance White had been out of town in Florida on an extended visit. And when she arrived back at her house at Page Boulevard, there was a odor. You guys know because you're the true crime sleuth. It was not just a smell of garbage rotting. It was a odor that overwhelmed the senses. And when she walked in, she knew that something wasn't right. And her first instinct was to call detectives. Now, what an unusual phone call, right? She says, I don't want to do any type of investigation on my own. And there were flies by windows of her home that seemed like they were clawing to get inside of her residence. This didn't seem right at all. And when the lead detective who arrested Stewart Weldon heard about this strange phone call and where it was located, he got this sinking feeling in his stomach. Page Boulevard was the same street where Stewart Weldon lived, and they went to this residence not knowing what to expect. They were greeted by Constance White. She was an older woman. She seemed to be very gentle and about 70 years old, very polite. And she explained everything that I did. But there was a difference. She said that her son had recently been arrested the night before. And when they inquired about who her son was, she revealed that it was Stewart Weldon. The detective's blood ran cold. He knew that this was going to be something that he didn't want to find, but had no other choice but to do his job and investigate. Detectives started to go around the house, and the smell was overbearing. But as they went throughout the house, they didn't notice anything upstairs that was out of place, anything that suggested that the smell was coming from the upstairs rooms. But there was a basement. And as detectives entered the basement, the smell was overwhelming. Whatever was causing the smell was right there in that basement. But as they walked down the steps, blood droplets that marked the stairs. The air was heavy, thick, with the smell of decay. To the left was an open door, and blood seeped from beneath it. Inside, they found a woman's body, face down, decomposing. The lead detective, who was the arresting officer in the traffic stop for Stewart Weldon, decided to get out of the basement because the stench from the body was overwhelming. He needed to get some type of fresh air. He exits the house, but there's a detached garage. And he seemingly walks over to get a couple of rounds of fresh air in his lungs, and he notices the garage. And as he peers into the window, he sees what he believes is another body wrapped tightly in plastic. And when they opened the garage, the smell of decomposing flesh hits their senses all over again. There were several bags of lime stacked nearby, which is a chemical often used to speed up decomposition. They began to look further by the detached garage, and they noticed in the backyard there were two shallow graves. By the time the investigation was done, police realized they were standing in the home of a serial killer. May 31st, 2000 was in shock. Investigators had to process this house from top to bottom. And when the head detective that arrested Weldon found out that there were bodies at this home, he knew that he had done a good thing by requesting the bail. Throughout the processing of the home, they found several electrical cords tied to different objects. And when they asked Weldon's surviving victim, She said that he would tie her up with these electrical cords that they found throughout the house. They found blood and semen throughout the home. They also discovered two empty bottles of bleach hidden beneath the stairs. And there was a sticky surface, and it appeared that he had cleaned up. And they figured that something happened there. They did their due diligence to process underneath the stairs as thoroughly as possible. The forensic team overall believed that at least one of the women had been killed underneath the stairs and later moved to the garage. A cadaver dog alerted near a shed. When they dug into the dirt, they uncovered a skeleton inside of a plastic bag. The third victim. The three women identified were Kayla Escalante, America Leiden, and Ernestine Ryan. There's not a lot that we know about each of the victims, but I would like to tell you what I know about Ernestine Ryans. 3 months earlier, Ernestine's family had been searching desperately for her. She was described as someone who was always there for everybody. She was a loving mother, a fighter, and a woman who battled addiction but worked hard to turn her life around. In 1994, she entered rehab and successfully went on to have two daughters. Her oldest daughter's name was Kiara, and then she had a daughter named Miracle. She got a job and stayed close to both of her daughters and tried to remain sober. But this was something that she had to fight. By her early 40s, she moved from Hartford, Connecticut to Springfield, chasing a better opportunity. And she had a roommate that she moved with to Springfield. Her name was Susan, her younger daughter who moved to Springfield with her as well. Susan seemed very supportive at first to family and friends, but soon Ernestine's family noticed that something was wrong. It seemed that Susan wasn't the best influence on Ernestine in terms of her sobriety. Still, the family remained hopeful that Ernestine would remain resilient in her sobriety, and rebuild her life for her and her youngest daughter. Now, her plan during that time, although she moved to Springfield, was to stay in Springfield, Massachusetts for a time, but eventually she wanted to go to where her daughter was. She was soon to have her first child, and she wanted to just spend time with her daughter in her pregnancy, loving on her first grandchild, and being a part of that process to strengthen the overall bond of her family. But in February of 2018, she called her daughter and she sounded anxious, not like herself. And shortly after, she vanished. Now, initially, when she vanished and she didn't pick up the phone, her family felt that more than likely she got back into doing drugs. But they were sure that she would come out of it in time to at least celebrate her youngest daughter's birthday, Miracle, who was still living with her at the time. But it wasn't unlike her to go missing for some time if she was doing drugs. But the one thing they knew is she would always resurface. But when she missed her youngest daughter's Miracle's birthday in March, something she would never do, the family knew something was terribly wrong. The family reached out to her roommate, Susan, and she claimed that Ernestine and her got into some type of verbal altercation, and Ernestine left without her phone or her keys, and she never returned. Susan then said she was concerned. She filed a missing persons report. Ernestine's family back in Hartford, Connecticut, filed a missing persons report there in Connecticut, hoping that maybe she came back and it was her place of origin. They believe that the police in both states didn't take it seriously because she had a history of drug abuse and she had a problem with addiction. They also felt that she would simply surface at some point in time. However, what they thought would be a phone call to say that they located Ernestine was a call that they'll never forget. It was a call that confirmed their worst fears. Ernestine's Ryan's life ended in that basement, but her story and the stories of the other women help to uncover the truth about what happened at the house on Page Boulevard. On April 2nd, once Ernestine's family received the phone call from the Massachusetts State Police confirming her death, the other family members of America Linden received the call. She had been missing since September. Kayla Escalante, who never was filed as a missing person, was discovered in May. All three women had ties to the same area, High Street, Union Street, and all shared the similar struggles of drug abuse. The story made headlines. More women came forward. 7 or 8 survivors told the police that Stewart Weldon had attacked them as well. One woman recalled being beaten and sexually assaulted 6 months before Stewart Weldon's arrest. And she did report her sexual assault. However, she didn't know the area and she was unable to identify the house, leaving Stewart Weldon the opportunity to continue to attack and sexually assault women. But once she saw his face on TV, when all of the bodies were discovered at his home, she was able to finally place a face to the man that was responsible for her abuse. According to his survivors, they all described him the same. He was charming at first, generous with drugs, and that's what led them to his house. They went in willingly, but once they arrived in that basement, that charm disappeared. Let's talk about who Stewart Weldon was. Although we know he is responsible for such tragedy and evil, let's get a glimpse into who he was before this. Stewart Weldon was born in June of 1970 in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And eventually, after his father passed in 1990, his mother moved him and their family to Mount Clair, New Jersey. When Stewart reached high school, he had significant learning problems, ADHD, dyslexia, and in 1996, he picked up a charge for sexually assaulting a young girl. Later on, another charge that seemed to change the trajectory of his life is when he picked up another charge with assault of a deadly weapon. And in 2005, he was sentenced to prison for 3 years. After he got out of prison, he moved to Springfield, Massachusetts with his mother. I want you to know that he had several drug arrests, assault and battery, traffic stops. He had been arrested over a dozen times and had over 60 charges. Simply by looking at his criminal background, it isn't hard to understand how he eventually graduated to sexual assault, to then raping, kidnapping, and then eventually murdering women. After Stewart Weldon was found through the traffic stop and eventually finding out that he was a serial killer, at that particular time, he was evading arrest. He had cut off his ankle monitor on paper at the time that he was doing all of these murders at his mother's house. Weldon's trial was scheduled for April of 2020. And it was delayed because of the pandemic to September of 2020. He faced 3 counts of first-degree murder, 8 counts of strangulation, 9 counts of aggravated rape, and 5 counts of aggravated kidnapping. For prosecutors, the survivors were key, and they needed to build up their case, but it wouldn't be easy because many of these women struggled with addiction or unstable housing, and this just made it hard to bring them in and get them to testify because, after all, they were victims and they had to relive the traumatic events. Weldon pled not guilty and refused to cooperate. By October of 2020, they ordered a mental assessment to see if Weldon was mentally fit to stand trial. Forensic investigators uncovered something that was crucial to the evidence and proving that he was mentally fit to stand trial. If you remember, I talked about a sticky surface that was found underneath the basement steps with 2 empty bottles of bleach. When they ran forensics, they discovered that this is where Ernestine Ryans was killed, underneath the basement steps. They know that he attempted to clean the surface and then he moved her body to the garage. The fact that he moved and buried her body and attempted to bury it implies his intent, his mental capacity. He knew that he was wrong for killing her and he attempted to cover it up through his actions. This was good evidence to prove in court if it came back that he was mentally unfit. The results of the mental assessment is that he was mentally fit to stand trial. He changed his plea to guilty. A lot of people wonder if his mother, Constance White, had any idea of what her son was doing in that basement. How could she not notice the smell, the flies, the decay, or her son going back in the backyard and digging up plots to bury his victims in? But there was no evidence that the police could connect her to having knowledge of the murders. They found various cell phones and laptops throughout the residence, and one of the videos in particular helped to disprove that she had any knowledge. Weldon was in a video talking to the camera, and he began apologizing to his mother and also said that if he was ever to get caught, that he was responsible for the murders of all of his victims. During sentencing, the families of all of the victims filed into the courtroom, and they gave their victim impact statements. Ernestine's daughters stood bravely before the judge to read how Stewart Weldon's actions impacted their lives and would change it forever. It wasn't closure, but it was strength. On September 30th of 2021, Stewart Weldon was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole. Even in prison, the truth lingered. He had slipped through the cracks of the system. He was on an ankle monitor. How is it possible that they did not arrest him after he removed it illegally? Police believe that Stewart Weldon has more victims, but he won't talk, and there weren't any more found. Takeaway. Every case we tell here at Murder in the Black carries something heavy. Not just the facts, not just the fear, but the lives behind them. For the families of Kayla Escalante, America Lydon, and Ernestine Ryans, justice came, or a semblance of it, but peace may never fully follow. Their voices matter. Even though they were dealing with their drug addiction, their lives mattered. Their stories matter because it reminds us that vulnerability should never equal invisibility. That every missing person deserves to be looked for, no matter their past, their struggle, or their story. I hope that you have found some value in today's story. I always want to know what you think. So please comment, interact with me. That's how we can talk. True crime and current events. Today, we're going to be talking about the bodies found in Houston, Texas, in their bayous and waterways. As of mid-September of 2025, local media reported at least 13 bodies recovered from Houston bayous so far this year. One particularly concentrated week, 5 bodies were recovered from the Houston waterways, which fueled a lot of speculation about linkage of a serial event. Some of the identified or publicized cases was Jade Sage McKissick, a University Houston student who was 20 years old. She was missing for about a week. Her body was found in Bray's Bayou. Officials say the autopsy revealed no signs of trauma or foul play in her case so far, though the investigation remains open. Some are still unidentified, and in many cases, causes of death are pending on the autopsy results. In one incident, a body was recovered after a report that someone jumped into the Buffalo Bayou. Another recovery, a body was reportedly seen floating near White Oak Bayou meets Buffalo Bayou in downtown Houston area. Now, law enforcement officials, the Houston Police Department, have consistently denied evidence of a serial killer or confirmed connections between the various discoveries. Criminology professor in Houston, commenting to the press, noted that such recoveries, though unusual in clusters, do not by themselves constitute as proof of foul play, and many deaths in waterways result from drowning, accidents, or medical emergency. My question to you guys is, I have been looking at these reports as they have funneled in, and I don't know. I just think that this is very unusual, and I will be following it closely. So my question for you is, although the Criminology professor said that it doesn't always have to be linked, and there are several bodies found. He himself even said that clusters of bodies being found in this way is unusual. So, do you think there is a serial killer in Houston, Texas? I want to know your thoughts. And if you're in the Houston area, please be careful and be on your guard. Because as we know, there is no such thing as being too careful. That's our case for this week. Make sure you interact with the polls and leave a comment. If you haven't joined us on YouTube, make sure you do so. And until next time, this is Murder in the Black.